Ladies and gentlemen, we always leave the best to last in this, in this event. And we've got a great treat here. My old friend Radek Sikorski has kindly agreed with all his busy life to come and talk to us and wind up this conference. I say old friend advisedly, Radek. I think the first time I knew of you was a very long time ago, you will remember, when you were the only person foolish enough to take a very large sum of money up to Herat in Afghanistan to help finance the efforts of Ismail Khan, who now regards you as a sort of secular saint as a result of that extraordinary expedition. I think if your escort had known of what they were carrying, you probably wouldn't have survived the experience. But there were other things which we can talk about there. And believe it or not, finding myself trying to check out rather a curious figure some of you will remember called Jonas Savimbi in southeast Angola. I thought I was one of the first coming in to do so. Who had been there 2 weeks before but Radek? It shows that he's a man of the very widest experience with an enormous amount of experience in our field, particularly in defence. He was, first of all, a junior defence minister, Minister of Defence, and now once again, Foreign Minister. And without further delay, I just want to say how extraordinarily grateful we are to you, Radek, for coming. And we hugely look forward to what you have to say to us.
My Lord, ladies and gentlemen, well, let me share a memory too. Of course, the reason I was able to help the effort in Herat was that Robert was the patron of a very worthy British organization at that time called Afghan Aid, which had a safe house in the university town in Peshawar. And if you remember, at that time, the received wisdom, bunch of Afghan peasants defeating the Soviet army, no way. The Russians always win. And we know how that ended. Ladies and gentlemen, since Russia's full-scale invasion against Ukraine, I have roughly divided countries into two groups. These to whom I need to explain things, and these with whom I can discuss what to do about it. From the very beginning, Britain has been one of the latter. Even before the invasion, British intelligence, hand in hand with its American counterpart, warned about Putin's plans. And after the conflict broke out, the United Kingdom quickly became one of the leading providers of military support to Kyiv. In April, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak pledged yet another, so far the largest package of military supplies worth £500 million. He also announced that Britain would increase its defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by the end of the decade, and that your country's military industry would be put on a war footing. He made those announcements not here in London, but in Warsaw, flanked by the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. It was yet another token of British engagement in standing up to Putin's brutal aggression and building up a pan-European resilience. These efforts enjoy cross-party support in both countries. Less than 2 weeks ago, two shadow cabinet ministers, David Lammy and John Healey, visited Kyiv to signal that if elected to power, Labour would continue the Conservatives' efforts in this regard. Let me therefore take this opportunity to thank you for being such a reliable ally and generous supplier of military aid to Ukraine. The equipment Britain has provided, including the Storm Shadow long-range missiles, have been game-changing. Both the UK and Poland have also played a prominent role in hosting training programs for thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. People in Britain seem to understand that the Russian aggression against Ukraine is not a local skirmish, but a brutal colonial war with far-reaching consequences. Russia's goals seem to be clear: to recreate its sphere of influence in Central Europe against the will of nations which shattered the Iron Curtain 35 years ago, to replace the system of sovereign states abiding by the rules with a concert of rogue powers making the rules as they go, to normalize the use of force as a means of changing borders, to reintroduce state violence on a massive scale as a way to exert control over populations. Should Putin prevail, ripple effects of his actions would be felt not just in Europe, but around the world. Let me name just a few. First and foremost, millions of Ukrainians would fall under the rule of Kremlin's regime. They would be either relegated to a second-class citizenship or deported deep into Russia and replaced with ethnic Russians, as is already the case on the Ukrainian territory that is occupied by the Russian army. Second, millions of Ukrainians would seek refuge from this new Russian order, either in the European Union or across the Atlantic, provoking another migrant crisis. Third, Russia's victory would embolden other countries keen on regaining control over what they see as their mutinous colonies or spheres of influence, and we can think of a few very powerful ones. Russian propagandists, along with their allies, try to convince the world they are trying to create a new multipolar order where smaller state sovereignty will be respected and cherished. That is, as long as it does not collide with their imperial ambitions, in which case, as we can see in Ukraine, all bets are off. Fourth, Putin's triumph would undermine other countries' trust in security guarantees that they now enjoy. This may lead them to look for enhanced protection, including nuclear deterrence. Military spending would rise rapidly, starting an arms race on a truly global scale. We are, I think, already somewhat in it. I address this point particularly to those worried by increases in military spending we have seen so far, because obviously they always come at the expense of something else. Fifth, international institutions, including the United Nations, where Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council, would lose all their remaining credibility. Space for diplomatic solutions to any future conflicts would shrink even further. If Russia prevails, chronic instability will spread not only across Europe, but around the world, giving extra fuel to a global coalition of dictatorships we can already see emerging and collaborating. But Russia will not win this war unless we let her. The cost will be relatively small. We do not have to fight with our own soldiers. We just need to provide financing and weapons to Ukrainians who will do the job. They surely do not lack motivation, as it is the fate of their own country that is at stake. With our assistance, Ukraine will be able to hold its front lines and raise the costs of Russian aggression. It will also have a chance to negotiate from a position of relative strength once there is any room for negotiation. Ladies and gentlemen, brave Ukrainian soldiers do more than defending their country. They buy Europe time to rebuild our own deterrence. In order not to waste it, we must turn our economic might into political and military capability. Russia has put its relatively small economy on a war footing. Expenditures related to the war, fighting, armaments, occupation, now consume up to 40% of Russia's budget. In such circumstances, continuing business as usual is obviously not an option. I hope the example set by Poland, which now spends 4% of its GDP on defense, will be an inspiration to others. Deterring an aggressor may be a costly endeavor, but much less so than a war on one's own territory. 2 years after Russian invasion, estimated costs of rebuilding Ukraine have reached almost $500 billion, $500 billion, and are growing by the day. The cost of human suffering and life is, of course, immeasurable. Let's therefore spend some of our money now so that we don't need to spend much more later on rebuilding Ukraine. Boosting military budgets is just one part of the equation. We also need to make sure to spend it wisely, including on air and missile defense, artillery ammunition and various types of missiles, also those allowing for deep precision strikes, logistics to enable military mobility across Europe. And in this process, the West must increase its production capabilities to reach levels sufficient not only to meet Ukraine's needs, but also to replenish our own stockpiles. It is obvious that Europe is lagging behind, and the EU's defense and technological and industrial base suffers from years of underinvestments. A radical change in the approach to defense readiness and securing critical military capabilities on the continent is necessary. European defense industry strategy is currently one of the most important projects in this regard. Its implementation would bring a meaningful change and must be a priority for the new European Commission. And by saying it must be a priority, what I mean is it must receive real, generous funding. Defense is expensive. Follow the money. If there is not enough resources, it means we're not serious yet. If we succeed, though, a surplus equipment production would be enough to also equip a robust joint rapid reaction force of at least 5,000 troops. It should be financed from the EU budget so that it's fair. We contribute to it in proportion to GDP. And it could be deployed in the EU's immediate neighborhood to make a difference whenever and wherever our security is at stake. I don't mean that such an enhanced brigade could replace NATO. Deterring Russia is obviously a job for NATO. But we do have other threats. Wagner Group is all over North Africa. There are still warlords in the Balkans. We shouldn't be calling on our American allies every time we have a lower order challenge in our immediate neighborhood. Improving European defense should not, obviously, come at the expense of our commitment to NATO and the unique role it plays in the European security system. Therefore, instead of advocating strategic autonomy for Europe, it is, in my view, better to call it strategic harmony of the European Union and NATO. We also have to relearn how to champion the escalation game. Russia is constantly testing the West and pushing boundaries of what is possible and permissible. Repeated violations of NATO airspace are but one example. One Russian missile flew across 2/3 of Poland and landed last year 10 kilometers from my house in Poland. We need to be in a position to react firmly in order to force Moscow to step back and for Moscow to wonder what we will do, rather than constantly deterring ourselves and saying what we will not do. Historically, and we have 500 years of history between us and Russia, showing weakness has only provoked Russia to escalate her aggression. We also need to be deliberately ambiguous about when and how to react. We think that doing what I've already mentioned, always declaring what our own red line is, only invites Moscow to tailor its hostile actions to our constantly changing self-imposed limitations. Ladies and gentlemen, Poland consistently favors the deepest possible inclusion of the United Kingdom in the EU security and defense structures, if you so wish. The EU-UK security defense cooperation must be revitalized and underpinned by a more methodical framework, now that the bad blood over Brexit has largely evaporated. It should include, in my view, a structured dialogue on the Euro-Atlantic dimension of military capability development, on rapid reaction forces, on resilience, on hybrid cyber and disinformation countermeasures, as well as European defense industry cooperation. The aim is to provide the highest possible level of inclusiveness between EU and non-EU NATO allies. I am sure that our countries and the new governments on both sides will continue to stand together in upholding a stable, resilient international system that protects freedom, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. The United Kingdom is an indispensable part of the global and primarily European security architecture. You are an island, but you are a European island. You may have affairs elsewhere, but to us, you are married.
Radek, thank you. You want to ask questions or not?
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. We'll keep it very short. The sting always comes in the tail from him. He's very kindly said that he would be prepared to answer a couple of questions. If you could say who you are, make it a question, not a speech, and we will try and finish on time. Yes, Robert.
Do I need a microphone?
You probably do.
Very specific question, Radek, about Russia's attempt to alter territorial waters boundaries in the Gulf of Finland and the Baltic. How do you see it from your and the Polish perspective?
Well, first of all, Polish herrings will not be Russified, okay? And secondly, I think it is some kind of mistake because they've taken the message down from the web pages. So we don't know whether it was serious.
Yes, sir. Halfway, three-quarters of the way back with your hand up.
Yeah, hello. Simon Angland, King's War Studies. What do you see as the United Kingdom's main contribution to this?
Ukraine, I think, shows that Britain can play an useful and honorable role in doing the right thing ahead of the curve. You know, going back to old Afghan days, do you remember, Robert, there was this debate we had in 1985, and this was just as passionate as today. Should the United States or shouldn't it supply Stinger missiles to the Afghan resistance?
Never to be forgotten. Yeah.
Right? And it's a little bit like today's discussion about hitting targets in Russia. And the issue was finally decided by Reagan when Britain sent some blowpipe.
Yeah, it didn't work very well.
But it was important politically to show the Americans that it's possible to do. And you reacted immediately to the Russian invasion, and with not helmets and and syringes, but with weapons. And that set a certain good pattern. You know, you still have the largest defense budget in Europe. You are still a country, actually just like us, which doesn't shy away from sending troops abroad. You know, you had a brigade in Kandahar. We were next door in Ghazni. You were in Basra in Iraq. We were just north of you in command of Central South. And so, in a sense, you know, we territorially are Western Europe's anti-tank mine. but you are perhaps Western Europe's potentially expeditionary force. And I think we are, in that sense, we are made for each other.
Right. Thank you very much, Radek. You can see it's a great advantage from our point of view to have somebody who's utterly bilingual. The result partly of St Antony's College, Oxford, and a little bit of roughing up at the AEI in Washington.
Pembroke, actually.
Beg its pardon. I always get something wrong. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. It's in a busy time, hugely appreciated.